So Cool, you
Okay, we can. So, okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for attending our section. And for our presentation, again, I thank you, Andre, for introducing us. And I just wanna tell you more about me. I am an educational program professional, currently assigned to work for the Office of Student and School Support, Nevada Department of Education. And I have been with the department for 16 years in past July. And I'm here with my colleague, Brenda Moore Brisbane. So I'm not sure if, so Brenda, maybe I let you introduce yourself first before I go further for the next slide, please.
Okay, thank you, Cool. As Cool said, my name is Brenda Moore Grisham. I used to be Brenda Bledsoe, and I had that changed because I wanted my name to be representative of who I was at birth and my name of my son that I associated with. So it's a long name, and so I shorten it to Grisham whenever I need to. So it's a little complicated. So thank you for joining us today. We wanted to share some information with you. And so with that, I'll move forward. I also am with the Department of Education, have been with the department for just over 5 years now. Started with the ADAM unit, if you're familiar with that office, and have been with Office and Student and School Supports about 2 years now. So thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. So our presentation, so then I will do the first half. We'll be presenting about weighted funding in Nevada school, and then Brenda will do the second half. So then we will have some time to address your questions. And just so let you know, some questions we may be able to address right away. Some we might have to bring back to some of our colleagues who are in charge in different programs. So Andre gonna monitor the chat for us. So feel free to add any question in the chat for us. So with this presentation, we're hoping that after attending our section, so you'll be able to identify weighted funding purposes, what allowable services for students who identify as at-risk student, and also the services and activity for students who identify as English learners. And also we will be presenting the weighted and total allocation per fiscal years and by district, and the total up by category and by fiscal year. So hoping that you also will learn on recommendation of the use of fundings. And Brenda will also talking about timeline or recommendation of data collection. So this slide show weighted per pupil funding by categories for 3 different fiscal years. So last fiscal year, the current this fiscal year, and next fiscal year. So as you see by category, we included the weighted and also the total allocation. So then as you can see here, gifted talented category remain the same from last fiscal year and this year and then next fiscal year. So then you will see for student identified as English learner, we have almost double weighted and the total allocation, as you can see there. So then at-risk student, there's a huge, probably the biggest the allocation that we have compared to last fiscal year from 0.03 to 0.35. So that's like 91% increase. So again, this slide was showing the total allocation by category, by school district for this current fiscal year. So then, as you can see here, all districts receive the weighted funding for the first two category, English learner and at-risk student. But then you will see some on gifted and talented that some districts did not have that. But again, just so you know, Brenda and I will be in charge in the first two category. Just so you know that on gifted talented student, it's under different office. So if you have any question, please put in the chat. We can reach out to Andrew Morgan. So he's the one who oversee gifted talented program. So that was I mentioned earlier that in some of category we may not be able to address right away for you any question that you have. So again, this slide is similar to the previous slide, but this is for the next fiscal year. So again, it's very similar, but the number of the dollar is slightly different, but then the weights are the same between English learner and at-risk students. So you can look at on your school district that you come from to see if something you can see that in there, because we not know how much your school receive. So Brenda and I will be able to tell you by school district. So if you wonder how much you receive from each school within your district, that will be a question for the leadership in your school district. Again, just so then some of you probably thought, okay then. So then we want to know, like, so what at-risk definition, because we want to just because in the past, when we talk about students who identify as at-risk student, you will think about the student who have received the free reduced lunch. So that was just very common in the past. So, but with the last registration section that provided revised some new definition for this category. So, and then the detail is also in the Senate Bill 503, Section 16. So this includes the new definition with student with free reduced lunch, meaning economically disadvantaged, or student who also at risk on dropping out of high school and also fail to meet minimal standard of academic standard. So then with this, so they can meet one of those. Then, but when they rank, the quintile of the student who in that the bottom of the quintile, so that would be the student who identify as a student. And again, when we look at that, Brenda and I received some factors, how they run the math on the quintile of the student for the total state. We were surprised at how many factors that they have. So I kind of just summarize that in there. They actually use the total of 75 factors. So so I kind of have it in there for you, but it was just too much of that, but just for your information to see how they run it, because the reason they did all that just so they can capture all students, not to miss to be identified as at-risk student, is actually more beneficial for school to do it that way.
Cool. Before you move on to this slide, we have a few questions in the chat. Larry, if you can kind of give voice to your question, and then Gary, and then Tara, that would be great.
Yeah, I was asking about the gifted and talented part of it, but I know that you had in your comments that said that that was something that you and Berta didn't really know about, and that I guess Andrew Morgan was the person.
Yes.
Yes.
He works with the Office of Inclusive Education. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to interact with him or not, but he's the person that oversees the Gifted and Talented program for the Department of Education. So we were really focused on what's falling under the Office of Student and School Supports today. So we would refer you to him for further information about that funding. But thank you for asking.
Gary,
Hi, can you guys hear me all right?
I
we
can hear
can.
you.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Just a quick question. I'm out in a rural school in CCSD, and we're working with SOT and CAB. I've heard or been told that the CCSD has a PPE amount for each student, and then there also is a rural funding amount that almost in addition to the typical PPE for CCSD. I was wondering if you guys knew those current amounts or if that's true. Could you comment on that?
I won't say that we're up to par and full knowledge of that aspect of the pupil-centered funding plan. I can tell you that if you want to look at Senate Bill 503, there are some numbers in there that talk about what the per pupil funding is per district, but there are weighting aspects for rural and for the distance and all of that we are not probably up to talking about today, but that is a reference that you can go to. And again, the funding from the department is at a district level, though it is based on per pupil counts from the October 1 data counts for last year. But you would probably need to have that conversation with your district in terms of how that funding is dispersed throughout the district. And I know that's not
Okay, then Brenda,
not a strong
just
answer, but that's
no, you're okay. Just a follow-up question. If we find out like, okay, we're not receiving those rural funds or that formula that we're supposed to be, how do we go about fixing that?
I'll talk just a little later about some accountability and monitoring that's going to happen for those funds. So maybe when we go through those slides, if you still have questions, we can take those and see if we can follow up on them for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have two more questions in the queue. Tara, and then Sandra.
Hi, I'm gonna apologize now for anything my family does while I am unmuted. But it's like nothing happens while I'm muted and then everything chaos ensues as soon as I unmute my mic. How do you determine students that are at risk of dropping out of high school?
I think Cole had alluded to earlier to the fact that the department actually worked with and I'm losing the name. Do you remember the group? Cole.
Oh, so from Adams working with who's that? The Infinite Campus
It's
Suite. Yeah. So one of
particular
those.
group they work with, and so we learned about the process afterward. Can't really explain it to you that much, but there is a list of 75 factors that the company has pulled into that decision making in terms of at risk. It's looking at a number of success factors, academics, some of the behavioral factors, home information. So all of that comes into the process, which is very intricate. And I kind of like it because I think it does, rather than just saying, and you'll notice that the statute did, through changing the definition, FRL used to be the only criteria, which was very limiting. And so, thank you, Cole. These are the factors that have gone into determining now for this funding whether a student is at risk of dropping out and needs the extra supports that is provided through this funding. So
Okay.
that's about as much clarity as I can give you on it.
Okay.
But it is it's a much more involved process than the simplistic view that we were looking at in the past.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there a way to get a copy of that? Or
Yes, we can
Yeah, we
share.
can drop that in the chat.
okay.
Yes,
Thank you.
welcome.
Great questions.
We have one more.
Oh,
Hi.
sorry.
I'm curious. So you showed the slide before that said projected weighted funds by district and category, and it had English learners, at-risk pupils, gifted and talented. But I feel like I missed, where's all the other kids? Is there projected weighted funds for all the students? And also, where do these funds go? Are they supplies? Are they curriculums? Are they teachers?
We'll share that with you just a little later, but for the first part of your question, this is only part of the per pupil funding formula. So there is the general fund that's already allocated and is going through the per pupil funding. This is additional funding specifically to provide supports for schools for the education of students who are identified as English learners or at risk. So this is on top of the regular per pupil funding, or in addition to that per pupil funding. So that's where the other students are covered.
So the
Yeah.
state provides this money and then the districts decide what to do with it?
That's correct.
Yes, yes. These are, Brenda will present that later. For English learner, you probably heard of Zoom program or Zoom services in the past. So then she will talk about that later. So that how they modify this to be under the SB 503. The same thing with at-risk services or activity. So it used to be Victory School or services. So then we would talk about that later. But these three categories are additional to the pupil funded in our state.
All right, that is it for the questions I have in the queue. Why don't you go ahead and continue, and I'll continue to monitor.
Perfect. Thank you, Andre. These are good questions. So another definition that we want to talk about, some of you probably already know about it, but we want to make sure you know how we define student who identify as English learner. So in our state, just like most states, we have identification of English learner process in place. So you probably heard of the home language survey. So those are in the package when the new student who enroll in A school in our state. So then now we have some that has some online, but then this is what the 3 questions that included in the home language survey. So we will ask what is first language of the child other than English. And the second question will be primary language spoken in the home other than English. And then the last will be most spoken language in by the student other than English. So these are, as you can see, we want to see the exposure of the kid to other language other than English. So then if those responses for those three questions, if all in English, they will not be screened for a potential English learner. But if one of those, at least one of those have any other languages other than English, so then the kid will be screened using for our states, because we Nevada is one of the VITA consortium state members. So then we use that tools we call VITA screener to screen potential English learner. So then we have some criteria in there. Basically just the quick, easy to understand for you. It's just if they have overall composite score that less than 4.5, they will be identified to receive English learner program or services. And then in the system for our state that we use Infinite Campus, so then they will identify them in the process. So then they receive the services. So again, on here, just a little bit additional information for you. The family can deny the services, but once they become or identify as English learner, they need to take the annual assessment, English assessment, language assessment annually. For the next slide, Brenda, we talk about some of the questions that you asked earlier. So then what then the allowable services or activity that weighted funding can be used? So Brenda, I will turn that to you.
Thank you. One of the things I just want to kind of mention, one of the main reasons that we wanted to share this with you today and celebrate this is because with the passage of the law in this legislative session, there was a significant increase in this amount of money to help schools with supports for these students. In the first slide that Cool shared, I believe, or the second slide, you can see that funding went from 0.23 for English learners to 0.45 over the next 2 years in terms of weighting of the funds. And then for at-risk students, it went from 0.03 to 0.35. So this was a really a significant increase in the supports. And so we wanted to share that with you today and celebrate that. In terms of the use of funds, Cool had mentioned earlier that we are still linked in those services while the Victory schools or the funds for Victory schools and Zoom schools were rolled into the per pupil funding plan, I believe in 2019. The funding for at-risk students and English learners are still associated with the services that were identified under Victory and Zoom schools. So just wanted to review those with you in terms of how these funds are intended to be used. And so just reviewing those services, they can be used for pre-kindergarten programs. Those pre-kindergarten programs should be at no cost to families, and they should be consistent with the requirements for the general pre-K programs established by the Department of Education. The funds can be used to do summer academies or other instructional programs that would be in session outside of your regular school days or even the school year. And they can be used to provide additional instruction or other learning opportunities when the school's not in session. The funds can be used to provide professional development opportunities for teachers and other educators that will support personnel in working to increase the achievement for at-risk students. And these are listed in NRS 387-12445. Don't want to spend a lot of time, quoting statutes, but you will find this list of services there. So they are in state law as the required services to be provided through this funding. So cool. The next slide, please. And then again, continuing the Victory services, these funds can be used for incentives for hiring and retaining teachers, other licensed educational personnel that are providing services specific to students that are at risk. It's not as much in the general population of teachers, but for those supports that are needed by students that are identified as at risk. You can employ additional paraprofessionals and other educational personnel or support people. You can do things like reading centers. It can be used to help support wraparound services, to coordinate with community programs, to integrate student supports in things that are needed to help these students be successful and graduate on time. There is a service under Victory and Zoom both, that there is the opportunity for the district or school to bring in a specific program, and I think it's important to pay attention to the language in this one, because if the school or district wants to implement a program that is kind of outside of the list that is shared here, they would need to demonstrate the record of success for for the program that's being proposed. They need to be able to show that that program or process of service delivery has been successful for similarly situated students in a comparable school district, and it would need to be provided by the approved by the superintendent of public instruction prior to implementation. So next slide, please. Very similar list of services relative to Zoom services, which are those that are identified for English learners. And these funds really are limited to providing these types of programs. So again, pre-kindergarten, reading skills centers, professional learning, can be used for incentives for hiring and retaining teachers. Next slide. Engagement. I think this one is a little different than the at-risk in terms of engagement, involvement with parents and families of English learners. Again, summer academies, and it can be used to support transportation, be used to support extended school days. And again, as with the Victory services, there can be an evidence-based program provided that may be a little bit outside of the general list, but there would need to be evidence provided and submitted for approval from the department for implementing that program. So we, in our brainstorming here, kind of went through some of the things that we know from our perspective that would be potential options that districts and schools might use these funds to support the schools that are under a corrective action plan under AB 219. They can use it to sustain program and services that have been proven to be effective for students who are at risk or are identified as English learners that have been funded through other sources. One of the main ones that we know is coming to an end next year will be the ESSER funding. So if the school or the district has had a program in place and something that has been really effective and you want to continue that, these funds would be one option to look at in terms of sustainability for an effective program that has been implemented under ESSER funding. And then you can think about using these fundings to support specific academic achievement supports for students identified as EL or at risk in terms of advanced placement courses for those students, specific content area work, and can be used to monitor the progress for students' academic achievement progress. I'm sure that you guys probably have lots of other thoughts that we may not have listed here, but these were some of the kind of the top ones that have been part of discussions around our camp. And I'm sure that we'll be reaching out for more input from you in the future on this. Next slide, please. Somebody asked earlier, I think, about the accountability for the use of pupil-centered funding plan. There is a provision in the statute for the Department of Education and the Education Commission to work together to gather the data on how these funds are spent. And that is laid out with some criteria for the elements of data that would be collected and reported back to the legislature on how the funds are spent and how it's impacting the academic performance and the progress of pupils. Again, those are laid out in the statute in AB 400. We didn't put them all in this, but we'll give you the reference if you want to go and review these. From the program perspective, Cool and I will be working within the department to look at those data that are being collected and that are required to be reported. One of the other things that we'll want to be looking and are working on a process to see what we may need to collect beyond that in terms of how the specific services that are identified for Zoom and Victory services are being implemented. Again, we want to be able to evaluate the impact of this going forward. And so that is a work in progress right now, but we will be working on that process and also the process for any request for approval for a specific program that the district or school may want to use. I'm sure that all of those approvals will come through the district level. So that would be something that we would communicate through the district for that information. Cole, do you have any additional information you'd like to share on that?
I would, after we present this, I'm gonna attach, just in case some of the audience interested in looking into that AB 400 and then also SB 503 and the 75 factors. Just because I'm sharing screen, I cannot kind of do it right now. So then, but I will share that so then they have information to look in more details.
So last slide that we wanted to talk about is the timeline for the funding. These funds were available July 1, so they have been, the students have been identified for the at-risk and the English learner populations, and those funds were distributed for this fiscal year already to the districts. They identified allowable programs and services should be funded during this school year with these funds. And so I'm sure that's going to look different at each school and should through the district determination. And again, as I mentioned, we will be looking at the process and the timelines for submitting the request for a unique program or service that a district or school would like to provide and facilitate that process of improvement with the superintendent's office. So with that, we will break and go ahead to any additional questions that you may have that we can answer. And if we can't, please post them in chat and we will give us your contact information. We will try to chase down any answers that we can provide if their answers are available right now.
Good, perfect timing, because we do have a couple of questions in the chat, and I did drop the link to record your presence in this session. So please make sure you respond to that. I'll be dropping the questions and comments survey in the chat later on. But we do have a couple of questions. Tara, go ahead.
Thank you. I just had a few questions. One of them was, I know I've worked at schools where they'll sometimes reach out because they have students that are like financially unable to pay for sports and activities fees and stuff. Is there any allocation to help with that? I mean, I know the main goal is to keep kids in school, but I also know that's a motivator. So I wasn't sure if there was anything like kind of slated for that.
Well, my first reaction is a lot of that would be determined at the district level in terms of
Okay.
programs that they want to implement. I
Okay.
think is some window of opportunity, not speaking specifically, but when we talk about things that will support their academic performance outside of the regular school hours, those might be things that you know, could be taken into consideration, but without a specific item to respond to, I think we just hold that to how the district is working, what programs they're working with.
Okay. And then my second question was with the ELL funding, do you know, or I guess this would probably go down to district choices too. We had, well, at the school I'm at now too, because I'm really in the same community as I was before, but we have a lot of like Asian, Pacific Islander. And when we get resources, everything's in either like English or Spanish, which doesn't help when you have so many other languages that, you know, people need resources in. Do you know if there's any kind of anything floating around with ideas for that, or?
Are you talking about services?
No,
for-
like, well, not just services, but also any resources we hand out. Like, usually the option is English or Spanish, but then we'll have like parents and families that need Mandarin or Korean, and it's, you know, or Tagalog, and it's difficult, like when you're like, well, this is all I have, it's English or Spanish kind of a thing. So I didn't know if they were looking into the possibility of expanding some of those options, maybe based on school population, or, I mean, I guess that's a really wide range of languages to do that with.
So if you're talking about materials or communication,
Yes.
we do have you know, translation or in a lot of languages, at least the top 6 languages that you mentioned, those are also included in terms of communication. So, but in the services, we do have some experts here, our colleague here too, they can chime in, you know, in the fields and in terms of services for those minorities languages. But then for communication, we actually have that for AB 195 that we need to translate this communication in those top 6 languages in our state.
Okay. All right. Thank you. It's always not frustrating, but I always feel bad when it's like we're scanning and Google translating and we can't just provide something for them.
Well, I think that's part of the intent of the funding is to have this additional funding out there to help fund those additional supports that you may be needing that the funding may not have been sufficient for before. So hopefully that will be something the district can take into consideration also.
All right, thank you.
Linda, you have something to add? Here.
Just to that, the federal Title III programs also provides only probably 1/10 of the funding that we're now receiving through the states, but providing for instructional services, low incidence interpretation for those types of supports is allowable. In terms of the general communication, unfortunately, that does fall under general funding, but anything that supports a student instructionally. And so where I see a lot of the low incidence languages is in Amharic. So there's different languages that I could see supported coming through, but I'm not sure about the Asian Pacific Islander. And so I would contact your ELL department to find out if there's resources available through them. But in terms of general communication to parents, that falls under that pupil-centered funding general funding formula.
Okay,
Thank you.
Tara, I also dropped the 75 factors that you asked earlier in the chat. So
I saw that. Thanks so much. I downloaded it.
thank you.
Leandra, go ahead.
Question. I was going to piggyback off what Tara was asking. So if a school found some sort of resource that they wanted to use for translation services for families in general to help with that engagement, would these type of funds be allowed to be used to purchase those, like if it was like translation devices or something like that? Or is these funds that would be general funding?
So as long as the services including revolving or relate to instructions, communication related to instruction, you'll be able to use the funding. Both are funding here, weighted funding, and also Title III funding.
Thank you.
Welcome.
I see the question, if a student qualifies in multiple categories, do they only receive one? Thank you, Larry. Yes, that's correct. If the student qualifies in multiple categories, they'll be funded at the highest category. And that also takes into consideration if the child is identified for special education services. I believe that's the highest level of funding, and so that would be the weight that would be allocated for that student.
Great questions. Yes.
Are there other questions that I've missed?
I do have one other question, kind of a follow-up to that. If I could just, if we provide a service or use the funding to, for example, purchase a tutor to work with some of the students, are they limited in who they can serve, or can they serve any of the students in the school?
I don't know that that's a question that we have responded or had a clear guidance on. I think my experience with some background in special education, there's provision there. As long as that service is primarily directed at that student, if other students benefit from it, there's no, I'm sorry, we don't want to say, you got to pull all the at-risk students over here and you can only support them. That is not something that would ever be promoted. So again, yes, if you've got an excellent program running that's focused on supporting at-risk students or students who are English learners, if other students benefit from that, I think that is the goal of education.
Perfect response, Brenda. Thank you. So, and also, we'd like to ask you here, just again, Brenda and I, we know the allocation at the district level. So if you from your school, you know that you have your English learner at risk student, you should receive this funding. So make sure you do, and then if not, you will work with your school district, because that what we don't know, and we don't have that data, like allocation by school, except for charter school that we do see that.
That's one of the goals and the things that we'll be working toward is how do we get down to your school level and look at the supports that are being provided, and are they consistent with what the law is asking to be provided for students. So more to come. Again, we may be finishing a little early. Just really do want to thank you all for participating. I've been able to see where some of you are, some teachers and some administrators, I think. So thank you all for what you do every day. We are your enabler. Our goal is to support you in what you do. And so thank you for sitting in and letting us share the good news with you about the additional funds today.
Thank you. This was a really interesting session. Oh, I just cut someone off. I'm sorry.
Sorry. I have a question about Title I funding, because I'm at a school that they took the Title I designation away, but all the teachers are so surprised because it seems like it's even more Title I than before, and we don't understand why.
We have to refer you to our colleagues in Title I for those answers, because it's certainly not my area.
They told us that it was Clark County School District that took the designation away. And so I don't know how they do that, but I thought it was above them that gave that designation.
I think they're identified as Title I, and I'm speaking a little out of turn, so I probably shouldn't. I think the schools are identified, but the district directs the funding. So
okay. I appreciate this because there is such a huge gap between schools and the people who make the rules. And so this was a nice opportunity to try and bridge some of that.
Thank you. That's what we're here for. Cool, I'll turn it back to you.
I just add the Andrew Morgan email in there just in case some of you here want to reach out or give the talent services.
Well, thank you very much, Brenda, for all the great information and the conversation. I did drop the feedback form into the chat. Please make sure you record any and all feedback that you have regarding this session on that form. And I'll have the room open for a little bit. We do have people coming in for the next session, but if there are any questions you want to get out before you leave to your next session, please feel free to do so. If not, I say goodbye and enjoy the rest of your day at this summit, and also hydrate.
Thank you. Thank you, Andre.
Thank you, Andre.
Thank you both.
Yeah,
Thank you both.
They did ask great question that what we anticipated too, right, Brenda?
Yeah. Very good. Thank you.
If you were able to anticipate the questions, what fun is that, right?
Well, because we have the same, we have several questions as well, when we working on this, like, oh, how we do this. Okay. Yeah. So that's why we are not surprised those questions. They great questions, especially like the ULC, if you qualify for all, because some of our kids identify you as English learner and also at risk and others. So.
Well, and we haven't collaborated in a little bit. So did you lose my email or something?
No, we just
all right.
Got lost in our own world, I guess. Huh?
Oh, okay.
Well,
are those people waiting as the next section, Andre? Are you in this room?
I am in this room all day.
Okay.
That's why I'm hydrating and stretching. But
okay.
I think.
Right. Bye.
Unless Lisa, Kimberly, do you have any questions, or are you waiting for the next session? Lisa, Kimberly? All right. Bye, cool.
Okay.
Bye, Brenda.
Bye, Brenda. Thank you.
Sorry, I was filling out the survey.
Oh,
couldn't
no,
get-
don't
And I
worry.
couldn't get back to you. I had an essay to write. Anyway, it wasn't really helping my question because I'm at an at-risk school where we have twice the kids that we should have in a classroom. And other schools who don't have these at-risk kids are at class size reduction. I have 31st graders and I'm at my wit's end. Anyway.
Oh, my goodness. Well, Lisa, bless you. Bless you. All right. Well, I'm going to have to
Right.
bring our presenters for the next thing. Are you staying for this one or are you going to go to another one?
Oh, I have to go check my schedule, but thank you.
All right. Take care.